Namaste, and welcome back to our series, What's in a Word? Here we're going to delve into the origins and backgrounds of certain everyday English words that we use when talking about or explaining Hindu Dharmas. I'm Samir Kalra, your host and one of the managing directors at HAF, and I'm joined today by my colleague and HAF's Director of Education, Dr. Vijay Satnarine. Welcome, Vijay.
Thank you for having me, Samir.
So today's an actual continuation of our last episode where we discussed the word God. Today, we're going to be discussing the word gods, plural. And interestingly, when I actually search for a definition of the word gods, there's no separate definition that pops up, but rather the original definition of the word God comes back. And just to reiterate what we discussed in our last episode, the Collins Dictionary states that God is a proper noun. The name God is given to the spirit of or being who is worshipped as a creator and ruler of the world, especially by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. So Vijay, two questions for you. Where does the word gods, plural, originate from? And why is there no separate definition for gods versus God?
Wonderful question. Thank you, Samir. I do encourage our viewers, if we can, to go back and have a look at the episode where we discuss the meaning of God, because there's really a lot going on behind some of these terms. When we, as you said, look at the word gods and we see that it's given as a plural of the singular proper noun God, we have to go back to the worldview in which this exists. And so the concept of God, or El, sits within a specific Abrahamic worldview. And when the concept of El, or God, in that context developed, there were multiple options that they could have chosen from. But they themselves chose the one that they deemed all-powerful, and they understood it to be the creator, and they labeled all of the other different divinities around them as false or wrong. In our Dharma traditions, completely different from the Abrahamic context, in the Dharma traditions, the Sanskrit word that we used was a word that the missionaries and colonial Indologists translated into English with the word gods. What they were trying to translate was the Sanskrit word devata, or deva. Deva has nothing to do with the Abrahamic concept of God, and especially nothing to do with the Abrahamic concept of false gods, or gods, plural, that make us polytheist, or any other allegation that could be used to label us as heathen. Even though in terms of its etymology, deva is linked with the Proto-Indo-European word deus, which you might recognize from Latin if you've ever been to a Roman Catholic school, and the English word deity, as in celestial being. But that was before these Proto-Indo-European languages and their hereditary languages were Christianized, when the words used by pre-Christian Europeans were redefined to fit a biblical worldview. A little bit complex, but I think you get the understanding that there was a plurality of understandings prior, but once Christianization happened, all of the words that were used to refer to various different beings, they were made to fit the biblical worldview.
Got it. And I think I already know the answer to this question, but why should we actually avoid using the term gods to describe Hindu concepts?
Oh, such a spicy topic. And I'm going to try and do my best to convey the real feeling and emotion that goes on with remembering some of this stuff. First and foremost, Hindus do not worship many gods. We must try and remove this understanding. It was given to us for the past 200 years in our schooling. We need to try and unlearn some of these things. It was the singular accusation used by Arab, Turkish, Central Asian, and European invaders of ancient India and Asia over the past 2 millennia to justify the loot, destruction, rape, enslavement, murder, and subjugation that was visited upon non-Muslims and non-Christians in the various settler empires that were made in ancient India and in Asia. Secondly, it's absolutely incorrect to presume that deva can be linguistically translated, i.e. that the word that is used by both languages refer to exactly the same thing. It can't be linguistically translated by the word gods. Now, Sanskrit uses the word deva in the sense of, and I'll give you the Sanskrit for that, divyatiti deva, that which illuminates or that which shines. Not in the sense that they light you up, but in the sense that they illuminate you with knowledge or empower you with strength. And in Sanskrit, that's known as jnanena shaktya divyatiti deva. There are many kinds of such beings because we had 4,400 tribes and people groups in ancient India. And each of those groups had their own concept of what beings they saw as special in their own worldviews. And that's because of, different geographies and different contexts.
Got it. So the natural next question would be, what is the more appropriate term to use instead of gods in English? And why is that the most appropriate term to utilize?
Okay, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of context with this one, so bear with me. But we're going to try and stick with a rational definition as much as possible. Divyati, in the sense of light and shining, therefore gives us the best linguistic translation as illumined being. Illumined being for devata or deva is the best translation because it's already close to the original intent of the word deva in Sanskrit, but it's also a word that's used in many Buddhist sources because their original translators were hyper aware of how the missionaries used translations of their own Buddhist works in order to spread the work that they were doing in those areas. So to be clear, and to use what we've discussed before in previous videos to summarize this very important point, Hindus do not worship many gods. Hindus are not polytheists across the board. In fact, Hindu Dharma traditions recognize that there are many illumined beings, whether they be ancestral, whether they be symbols of the natural world, whether they be elemental personifications, they're beings nonetheless, and exist alongside with other living beings like humans and animals. The devas are the means through which human minds can understand the variety and the mysterious nature of the multiverse and find solace and maybe even direction in their lives. So it's a really important concept. Now I'm going to give us a little bit of conceptual framework here. Bear with me. Monotheist Hindu Dharmas, such as Shakta, Shaiva, Vaishnava, Kaumara, and even Smarta traditions, they all recognize that every single type of being, including the devas, including humans, etc., ultimately come from the one supreme being who they all venerate. And while they are manifest during each cycle of a universe, the devas exist as personifications of the various processes that are involved in the maintenance of existence. So that's our monotheist Hindu Dharmas. The non-theist Hindu Dharma traditions, even though they're non-theist, they still see devas as a category of living beings who are powerful, who have developed insight that humans cannot possess because we haven't yet opened our minds and our intellects to the full capacity as they have. Still, even those devas are part and parcel of the multiverse, and once the cycle of a universe is complete, their separate existences will be dissolved into the oneness of Brahman. So I'll sum up. Hindus from any of the monotheist Hindu Dharmas venerate the supreme being in a form and with the names that are taught in their traditions, with the multiple illumined beings emanating from and serving that supreme being. The non-theist Hindu Dharmas validate the devas or utility in developing deep insight, and ultimately they ask their practitioners to focus on the original source, Brahman, the ultimate reality. There's so much more that we could say on this topic, so listeners will please pardon, again, me summarizing some really vast concepts, but it's very, very simple to say that devas or devatas are the illumined beings.
Got it. That's very helpful as usual, Vijay, and thank you again for providing all your insight. Viewers, namaste and thank you again for being with us, and stay tuned for our next episode where I know I'm going to learn a lot more about our Hindu Dharmas, and I hope that you will too. Namaste and thank you.